So, we have pressed the magic button, and hopefully, assuming all the technology has worked as planned, I should be now live streaming. I have to admit I'm slightly nervous because this is the first time I've ever live streamed anything. But I do have tech support upstairs, so if anything goes drastically wrong, do forgive me. Hopefully we can readjust any settings if anything goes terribly wrong. So firstly, apparently we're good. That was a thumbs up signal. So firstly, welcome. In case you're not quite sure where the magic of the internet is transporting you this evening, you are joining me in my living room in sunny and very warm Toulouse in southwest France. We're maybe 3 or 4 hours drive from the border with Spain, and on a very clear day you can see the Pyrenees from here, which is really quite a lovely place to be. So welcome from all over the world. I've been seeing people on the live chat. Oh, I have the live chat here. So if you have any questions, or if anything is very wrong or you can't hear me, please do just let me know and we'll do what we can. This is a bit experimental for all concerned. So first of all, I'd like to just thank the Institute of Modern Languages Research for putting on this event. This is part of the Open World Research Initiative's project on cross-language dynamics, and this particular strand of the project is looking at the concept of translingualism, so moving between different languages within the same community, and looking at translingual elements, which are elements of language that are relevant in more than one language. And hopefully, as the evening progresses, you'll see how this is relevant in music, which is so often called the universal language. So a little bit about myself, just very briefly, because hopefully I'm sure you probably want to hear the harp and not hear me just talk about myself. My name is Tamsin Durnley and I'm a harpist and composer. But before becoming a harpist, before studying composition, I actually studied Japanese at university, and now I live in France. So I've had a fair amount of experience working with and in different languages, and the problems and hilarious things that happen when you try and translate things from one language to another or from one culture to another. And sometimes one of the things that I noticed when working in different languages, I used to teach in a harp school in Tokyo, is that sometimes when spoken language just doesn't work, the music is nonetheless comprehensible. It kind of speaks for itself, and I think this is a really interesting phenomenon. So that's a little bit about me. And for those of you that aren't familiar with this instrument in front of me, this is, normally I would ask people what they call this instrument, because I find it really interesting to know what people think this instrument is or what people refer to this instrument as. But you will hear this instrument called a variety of things. So I personally call it the lever harp, because it has levers instead of pedals, which you'll see on the orchestral harps. You'll also hear it called the Celtic harp, the folk harp, the small harp. Sometimes people call it the Irish harp. I think I've covered all the bases there. But it has many, many different names, but I personally use the term lever harp. This particular harp was made by the wonderful Telanau Tavy in Wales. It's made of ash, and it has 36 strings, of which from here to here are made of gut. So my apologies to the vegans and vegetarians out there. And the bottom octave at a bit is made of wire bound, it's got a steel core and then it's bound with wire. So it's got a sort of much more metallic sound. So there you go, brief introduction to the lever harp. So I'm going to start off this evening by playing some Scottish music. So something that's relatively, or I suppose very traditional, and it wouldn't have been played originally on a harp quite like this one. The sort of original Scottish clarsach, if you're being a purist about it, would have had wire strings, would have metal strings, and it's actually a very, very beautiful sound. It's actually very different from the sound that this instrument has. But nonetheless, I'm going to play 2 Scottish folk pieces. The first one is Rory Dall's Port, which is composed by Rory Dall, which is blind Rory, who was alive in the 17th to 18th centuries, so that crossover period. And the second one is the Arran boat song, which was certainly referred to in the 1700s. Nobody's quite sure exactly when it was written or who it was composed by. So we'll start the evening off with that, and we'll take it from there. Okay, I'm just going to check the live chat to see if anyone is having any problems. I am not seeing any issues yet on the live chat, so hopefully we're good. Okay, excellent stuff. So what we had there were two Scottish pieces of approximately the same age, not entirely sure, but one that I played in a fairly traditional style, and one, hopefully, it was fairly obvious, was much more contemporary style. And the thing to me which is fascinating, the question I would like you to ask yourselves is, how did you know that? I'm guessing that most of you were probably fairly aware that there was a definite difference in style between the two pieces, apart from the fact that I changed key in the middle of it, and it was a different piece. But what was it? Was it the melody? Was it a more contemporary sounding melody? Probably, hopefully, you'll think, oh, something about the rhythm, and maybe the harmony was a little bit different, it's a bit more clashy. Although what I describe as clashing harmony doesn't necessarily mean contemporary. There's some wonderful clashes in medieval music. So, but what is going on here is a question that I just find so interesting. So let's look very briefly at what do we have? What is music constructed out of? So language, we have words, obviously phonemes, parts of speech. And I suppose the principal difference between language and music is that language doesn't have music doesn't have specific meaning. So you can't ask someone to shut the door in music. Or you can't say, this is a chair in music, which for some reason is a phrase that comes up a lot in language learning books. Clearly we all need to know how to sit down. But what is music constructed out of? So in its absolute basics, we have pitch, we have rhythm, and we have timbre. So I call these sort of the primary colours of music. So pitch, how high or low a note is. And out of pitch, we can construct melody. And out of pitch, we can construct harmony and tonality and tonal centres. Rhythm is hopefully fairly self-explanatory. It can be either the pulse or the rhythm of dun da da dun da da dun, the sort of the rhythm of the notes, the length, the durations of the notes, I suppose you would say. And timbre is the sound. So what specific sounds do we have? So the harp has a different timbre from, the violin has a different timbre from the flute, for example. Excuse me, I'm just going to get a drink of water. I said I was in sunny Toulouse, and it is very, very warm today. And I shut the windows because the neighbours have a tendency to be quite noisy, so it's really quite warm. So I may have to retune slightly. So anyway, going back to the idea of translating music. So when you're translating language, first of all, you need to know why you're translating. So for example, are you translating a business letter? If you're translating a business letter, obviously the main point is that the general tone and the meaning comes across so that you don't accidentally mess up a business deal. If you're translating a business letter from Japanese, you kind of have to make sure you get the main points, because there is, dare I say it, a slight tendency for lots of sort of flowery phrases which just don't translate into English. You have to make sure you get the main points. I actually do a lot of translation of song lyrics, mostly from French into English. I don't think I've actually tried to do an actual translation of a song lyric to be sung from Japanese. I've done ones to get the meaning, to have a sense of what the song's about in English. But you start to notice very, very interesting things. The other day, or several months ago, time just goes with lockdown, I was asked by the same person who asked me to translate from the French if I would translate a song from Portuguese into English, to be sung, to be set to the music. And of course my instinctive reaction was, well, no, because I don't speak a word of Portuguese. And I wouldn't dream of translating from a language I didn't speak. But he said, well, please, if you ask me really nicely, I'll probably have a go. If I do a translation, a word-for-word translation to French, could you work from that? Because it doesn't have to be accurate. And since I'd done the rest of the songs on the album, it did kind of make sense for me to translate this particular song. And you find yourself working at the level of sound. The level of meaning is obviously very important. So obviously, if it's a love song, you need to make sure it says approximately what the original said. But you find yourself working, okay, well, this is the recording, this is in Portuguese, and on this particular note, it has this particular vowel sound. And in a way, that becomes almost more important than the words themselves, which I found a very interesting process, because I was working more with timbre and the music than I was with actual meanings of words and sentence structure, which is sort of very different from translating literature or business emails. So looking at sound, and the same applies when you're in inverted commas translating music or arranging, how you want to put it. But if we think about it in terms of translation, I think for this evening that will be quite useful. So what I thought I'd do for the next piece is actually take you through a bit of the process that I would use when working from a piece of music from a very different culture. Because often I find it very interesting to read translators' notes. I'm a bit of a geek like that. I love seeing, well, this is why I made this translation decision. I think it's just fascinating because there's often no right or wrong way of translating a thing. I think someone said that they're a translator. You will know that there isn't usually a definitive answer. You just have to use your judgment of language and knowledge of the culture you're translating into. And it's a fascinating process. So what about when we're translating music? So the song I picked, or the piece of music I picked for this example, is actually an Arabic piece of music. I picked it partly because I really like the melody. I think it's a lovely melody. Partly because it actually translates very well into a Western sort of style of playing, and partly because there's quite an amusing translation story about the actual lyrics of the song itself. So hopefully there aren't too many Arabic speakers in the audience because my pronunciation is probably terrible, but the song I'd like to talk about is called Fog Elna Khel, or Fog Elna Khel, or something like that. And when I was trying to just find out a bit more about this piece, because I just knew the melody from a long time ago, and it seemed to have two titles, and nobody seemed to be able to agree which was the correct title. And it seems that the original title, and I hope I get this right, is Fog Elna Khel, which means up there we have a dear one. And it's a song from Iraq, and apparently it was common practice to rent out rooms on the ground floor to people passing through or to people who needed rooms, and the family would live above. And there was a gentleman not from the area who rented the room downstairs and kind of had a crush on the girl who lived upstairs, but it wasn't appropriate for him to address her directly, so he sang this song to her, Up There We Have a Dear One, and then I think it goes on about how beautiful she is, and there's loads and loads and loads of verses. But apparently, because his accent was different, so he spoke a slightly different dialect of Arabic, people understood this as Fog Elna Khel, which means above the palm trees. So, and already we have this wonderful mistranslation story about this piece. And interestingly enough, if you put it into Google Translate, it comes up with above the vinegar. So who knows? Just beware of Google Translate, guys. Or check with a native speaker first. So anyway, the process that I went through. So I'm going to play the melody very, very simply to this piece. And we'll talk about what the decisions I made. the basic melody. I have probably transcribed it slightly incorrectly, or the version I use is probably a sort of westernization, I'm not sure, but hopefully I will be forgiven. So, I talked earlier about the fact that it's very warm in here. There's a danger of my harp going out of tune. But that depends exactly what do we mean by in tune. So obviously in the West we use the A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Si. But the sort of fundamental building blocks is we have a note. I can double the frequency of that note by splitting it in half. So I get the octave. If I halve it again, I get the fifth. And if I halve it again, if it's going to work, I can just hear I get another octave. So these are the sort of physical building blocks of music, is the octave, the fourth and the fifth. And as far as I'm aware, all known musical cultures use these particular aspects in the music. The rest, how we arrive at the rest of the scale that we use is kind of out with the scope of this evening's concert. But basically, the essence is that different cultures divide up the scale in different ways. So we have arrived at our 12 semitones in Western music. Other cultures will use 5 notes, will use 7 notes, use 8 notes. But 5 is a very, very common one. But often the divisions are slightly different. So if I really wanted to get very Arabic feeling about this, so this is the scale as it sounds on my harp. Which the musicians amongst you will recognise as the harmonic minor. It translates very, very well. And it's very comprehensible across so much time and so much space. We can understand this melody, even if we don't quite understand the nuances. So, I have a tuning key. When translating this piece, I thought, well, I could try for the actual Arabic scale. I could try and do it. And in the scale of the version that I heard, that I was referring to, the third note of the scale is slightly higher, and the fourth note of the scale is slightly higher. So you end up with something like this. Possibly even more. So you end up with something like that. Which to my sort of Western ear sounds very out of tune. But hopefully to an Arabic music speaker that would sound like a better accent. So I like to think of when I'm playing, because it's obviously quite impractical for me to just retune the whole harp like that, and I'll probably get it wrong anyway. So hopefully when I'm playing in my Western harmonic minor, it will sound equivalent to maybe just speaking with a slightly weird accent. I'm retune back again. So I decided not to go down that route because it was very impractical. The next thing I thought about was, okay, well, how do I get a sort of Arabic sound? The harp is not really an Arabic instrument. But I listened to many variations of this particular piece on an oud, which is, and interestingly enough, the oud is actually the forebearer of the lute. And I've actually played many lute transcriptions which have been transcribed from the lute for the harp when the lute fell out of fashion. So, it's a nice circular process. How do I make the harp sound like an oud? The oud is played with a plectrum. So, bi-plectrum was my thought. And if I play... the oud is full of trilling, so I could trill. Which is a cool technique, and I think it actually does sound pretty good. But I doubt my ability to maintain the interest of the harp without other techniques for an entire piece, and I also doubt the stability of my hand to continue with this. So I decided to drop that, even though I think it sounds pretty good. You can sort of get a rough approximation of this technique by using your finger, which is what I went with in the end. If you have nails, I don't have nails, if you have nails it does sound a little bit better. But just one last thing before I do play this piece and stop talking about translation, is as I was playing this, I thought, well, maybe I could do like a super Western version of this, like just go all out and just make it very, very Western, and put it in these lovely sixths. I think sound quite pretty, not particularly Arabic. But as I was playing this, I thought that really reminds me of something. And I was thinking, it reminds me of, and I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Disney film Fantasia. It's like, it reminds me of one of those ones from the Nutcracker, you know, the one with the fish, where there's a fish and they're swimming and it's all really pretty and they've all got big eyes. And I looked this up because I didn't really know which piece is which. And obviously, that piece was Coffee, the Arabian Dance. So Tchaikovsky, writing in the 1890s, had used this sort of Arabic language, translated it into his Russian, and then made this lovely romantic piece. But it's still comprehensible across all of these different mediums, which I think is kind of amazing. So without further ado, and I won't explain my process for every piece, don't worry, but hopefully that just gives a bit of insight into the decisions you will make before you arrive at a final-ish, if I play it next week it'll probably be different, version or arrangement of a piece. So looking at these ideas of pitch and timbre, and how to get across the feeling and the meaning when we don't have words, but we do have these building blocks which are translingual, which are common between all musical cultures. So, go. Up there we have a deer one, or above the palm trees. You can take your pick. I'm just going to check the... It sounds very gypsy. Also uses the harmonic minor scale. Yeah, hoping everything is good. Sound is slightly low. I can move slightly closer to the microphones and see if that makes a difference. It was okay during the sound test, so... but if I move them too close, I'm going to hit them. I'll keep an eye on that. So if that does become a major issue, somebody please tell me, or tech support upstairs, please let me know. Okay, so that was an Arabic piece. We're now going to move to Japan and look at a piece. Well, it's a traditional folk melody, really, but it's very, very commonly played on the Japanese koto, which I suppose now we just call it the koto. It can also be called the Japanese floor harp. So it's probably the closest cultural equivalent that they have to the harp. I mean, harps and harp variants exist in so many cultures all over the world, which again is kind of a fascinating thing. I think the idea of getting a piece of string or cord or gut or wire and then stretching it and then going, oh yeah, that makes a nice noise, is fairly universal once you've explored the voice and like banging stuff, you know, drums and percussion and stuff. So I think it's a fairly universal thing, and this is great because the timbre is similar enough that again we can appreciate it even if we don't recognise all the nuances of a particular musical culture. And definitely, you know, once you get past your fairly basic scales and stuff, obviously cultures take these elements and develop them into very complex classical traditions, which do, you know, can be quite hard to get into. But the sort of basic building blocks, you know, even if you took me to you should play me a piece of Indian classical music. I went to a lovely Indian classical concert a good while ago now. And I have to admit, I struggle sometimes to pick out the melody amongst all the ornamentation, but I was aware of where the tonal centre was. It wasn't completely alien, and I thought it was very beautiful. And it made me sort of want to understand the structure more. The structure, I suppose, is another element. There are building blocks of music, one of the secondary colours, along with harmony and tonality. So the koto is an instrument that consists of usually 13 strings, and it has movable bridges. So they're all flat against the soundboard, and then you sort of put your bridges in place and adjust them to give you know that you want. So you can alter your scale that way. And it's generally tuned in some kind of, usually a 5-tone scale, some kind of pentatonic scale. So this one is tuned in the scale, goes like this. Oh, and the koto also is played with sort of artificial nails, so it's got quite a harsh sound if you've never heard one before. I'm starting to notice a pattern here, that we harpists are one of the few that actually just play with our finger pads. I'm not quite sure why that is. But so Sakura, Sakura, a very, very old Japanese melody. It means cherry blossoms, cherry blossoms. So, I've played you, I'm just checking there's no major issues. Thanks everybody for your really lovely comments. It's really nice to know that this is actually working. So I've played you quite a lot of slow pieces now, and we're going to move to a very much more contemporary sound world now, because we stayed with this sort of tonal, traditional, getting things from one geographical culture to another. But what do we do if we want to explore a completely different tonal language? And I very, very much like particularly sort of mid-20th century music, particularly Bartók. I'm a big Bartók fan. I love the sort of, particularly the string quartets. I just love this sort of, I don't know, they just sort of go to places and you're not quite sure where they're going, but you like it anyway. Maybe that's just me. So for me on the harp, when I want to do something like this, well, it's not a very obvious thing to want to do on an essentially very diatonic instrument. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the harp, I have 7 notes to my scale, and then it starts again. And these levers here change my semitones, so give me the sharps and the flats. Very brief introduction, but I don't have the full chromatic scale like a piano does. So I was thinking, well, how am I going to get this idea of this? How am I going to explore this new tonal language that I discovered quite a number of years ago now? But so my solution to this was obviously to try and write a piece with the same sort of feel. Clearly, I am not Bartók, but I'm going to play you a piece that I wrote to try and explore this new tonal language and see how it translated onto the harp. It's about the only piece that I play where I cannot remember the lever sections, so I have to write them down. Because it's not a key as such. I'll play you the scale that I end up with afterwards and you can see what I mean. This is the scale that we have. And the way I wrote this was just to put the levers at literally any random setting and see if I could make a piece. To try and take me out of the tonal language I was used to, because otherwise I kept falling back into the same ideas. So I leave it up to you to judge whether this is successful or not, but here it is. So there we have it, my efforts at translating sort of more contemporary tonal language onto the lever harp. How are we doing? Everything still seems to be running smoothly. Thank you everyone for your really, really nice comments. I'm glad it's still working. So, if I wasn't warm before that I really am now. So, that takes us now to, I guess, the sort of my own musical language, my own native musical languages. I was brought up, well, the harp is my only instrument for a start, and I was originally taught the folk harp from a teacher who was, well, the lever harp, who was very into early music, early medieval music, European medieval music, and I suppose Scottish folk music and Irish folk music as well, or the Celtic music. I've also sung in choirs, in church choirs, for the vast majority of my life, and I'm absolutely convinced that this colours the way that I now play pieces. There are just elements that I will put in an arrangement and think, I got that from, you know, so-and-so's choral arrangement. And one particular element that I use all the time, because I think it's very beautiful, but I think definitely if you're aware of it will say English choral music, is this suspension. Obviously it's not exclusive to English choral music, but it does come up a lot, and these chains of them come up an awful lot. So I'm going to now play you one of my favourite pieces, actually. It's a Welsh piece, unfortunately the title of which I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to pronounce it, but the English translation is The Death of a Skylark. I might just have a quick retune. Somebody once described a harp to me as a barometer with strings, and they're not they're not far wrong. I find particularly here in France, where the temperature fluctuations and the humidity fluctuations were a lot greater than they are in Scotland, where I was for the previous decade. Yeah, it's interesting for tuning and great business for the string makers. So here we are, Elegy for a Skylark, or The Death of a Skylark. That was Elegy for a Skylark, which is just one of my favourite melodies. I think it's absolutely beautiful, despite being so incredibly simple. And again, I'm not actually sure how old that piece is. I have to admit, I didn't check. But it certainly, I think, would translate onto basically any instrument. I've actually heard a jazz version of this, which is on YouTube if anyone's interested, which is really amazing and just another way of translating these melodies. And hopefully I'm sort of putting across the point that these musical elements are so universal, and even if you're not fluent in a particular musical language, you can go to a completely different culture and not even speak the actual language, and you can engage in conversation musically. At the absolute least, you can clap along to a beat. Even if the sort of underlying cross rhythms are very, very complex, chances are you'll be able to dance along or sing along or clap along, or if you're even vaguely familiar with the musical language, you can join in the conversation. I'll be attempting to play a blues piece later on, and I'm slightly embarrassed because my blues teacher is actually watching, so hopefully I won't embarrass you too much, Brenda. But again, just to get across, my blues language is still very much in its infancy. You'll probably hear that I need more vocabulary. But even so, you can start to join in. And I've even been known, after a couple of beers, to play one-handed blues on the piano, which is an instrument I don't even play, because the structure is that it's very universal. And obviously, again, it's developed, and there's much more complex versions of things, because that's what humans do, is we get a thing that's simple, and then we get good at it, and then you want to push the boundaries, and that's how we get basically culture. But fundamentally, we're working with very, very simple universal building blocks, which I think is possibly one reason why music does travel so far. And some melodies you can't even trace the roots of, for example, because they've just gone one way and then the other way, and then, oh, I've got a version of that, which is absolutely wonderful, because music, I think, as everyone is noticing, and particularly at this very strange time in the world, music really does bring people together, which is a little bit cheesy to say, but it is true. I don't know if there are people watching who don't understand my words, my English. I don't know, maybe I'm speaking too quickly anyway. But hopefully people will understand the music, or at least maybe enjoy the music, hopefully. So I'm going to now move genres entirely before we move on to blues, and I'm going to play you a rag, which again is actually one of my own pieces, because I was trying to understand this musical language slightly more, and I like to pull it apart and put it back together again and see if I can create a piece in this language, and then listen to it a year later, and when I've got more vocabulary, and see where I could improve, or just, that worked, or I didn't quite get that right, and now I understand the grammar or the musical language better. So this particular piece I wrote whilst surrounded by moving boxes. I was in the middle of my nth house move that year. It's a very long story. So we got all our boxes packed up, and obviously the last thing I was going to pack up was my harp, because I wanted to play it. So I'm sitting there surrounded by boxes. And so I wrote this rag, the moving house rag. Some of the fun of a ragtime piece in that. I had a lot of fun writing it, so hopefully you enjoyed that. The next piece I'm going to play is possibly, I will confess, the piece I'm the most nervous about having a go at playing, because I'm going to endeavour to play something bluesy on the harp. And as I said before, my blues language is very much still in its infancy, but the point of this evening is to show you how different musical languages and different musical genres translate onto the harp. Because very often as harpists, when we play jazz, we have to try and, or it's fun to, I suppose we don't have to, but it's fun to try and imitate other instruments. So playing blues does show off a wonderful amount of slightly different techniques that you probably haven't heard yet on the harp. So with that in mind, I'll be trying to imitate a double bass. And hopefully we'll even get some lever slides in here if all goes to plan. If all doesn't go to plan, then never mind, I'll feel blue. This is Sunday Morning Blues. hopefully that was too bad. But I have so much fun just exploring these new languages and adding to my vocabulary book. I actually have a jazz vocabulary book, essentially, where I write down phrases and licks and scales that I think are cool, and then I try and incorporate them. So you never know, if you hear me play next year, I'll hopefully have more vocabulary. But it is a huge amount of fun, and as again for me, the sort of intellectual challenge of playing this on my instrument is what kind of keeps me trying, really. So thank you, Brenda. And sorry, I can't reply to everyone individually, but I really, really do appreciate all the lovely comments, and just hi to everyone all around the world. I'm seeing people from the US, from all different states in the US, from Scotland, from the UK, from France, and I think Taras was in Australia. That's hardcore. I think it's about 4 a.m. in Australia. So I hope I'm not keeping you awake. Maybe I'm soothing you to sleep. So I've just got 2 more pieces to play for you. And the next one is really, honestly, a bit of a musical joke. Given that I have such an international audience, I'm not entirely sure that all of you will get the joke. But it's hopefully the Brits will get the joke. And hopefully the rest of you will understand that there is a joke. Because what happens when you mix different elements of different languages? I mean, sometimes you just get better explanations. You know, we borrow words from other languages and we adopt them into our own, so that they just become part of the lexicon, because it says what we want to say much, much better, in the same way that some of the techniques I've taken from, you know, jazz or from koto music, I now just use when I'm arranging pieces because they're useful to me, and I think they express a thing that I hadn't learned how to express before. But what happens when you mix them slightly irreverently, shall we say? And hopefully this next piece will make some of you smile. Hopefully that made a few of you smile. So, for those of you that were not familiar with the original melody of that piece, that was a piece from about 2 miles away from where I was brought up in West Yorkshire in the north of England, called Ilkley Batat, which means on Ilkley Moor without a hat. And it's a very silly song about someone who goes courting on Ilkley Moor without a hat and catches a cold and dies. Or if you do this, this is what will happen to you, so wear a hat. It's okay in summer though, it's not actually all that cold. With a little bit of Debussy thrown in there for good, ridiculous measure. So we are, in fact, coming to the end of the musical part of this evening. There will be time for some questions afterwards. I've allowed time for some questions. If nobody has any questions, you can all go get your glasses of wine a little bit sooner. There is, as I say, a bit of a delay. I'm not quite sure how long the delay is, maybe 10, 20 seconds like that. So I'll do my best to answer your questions if you do have any as they come in, but we'll see how it works because this is the first time I've tried this. So this final piece that I'd like to play is a South American piece, and I have to confess, I'm playing this for a slightly personal reason, partly because I really enjoy playing South American music. The South American harp, incidentally, is very different from this kind of harp. So this has a very high tension on the strings. You have to pull quite hard to get a sound. This particular harp has classical tension, so it really is on the high tension end of harps. More traditional harps have much lower tension. You play in a slightly different way, and they're perhaps slightly easy to play fast jigs and reels on. There's no standard harp. They're all slightly different. So if you're picking your harp, or if you're thinking about picking a harp, maybe think about the sort of music you might want to play, or best of all, ask a harpist or a harp teacher what they would advise. But the South American harp, the strings are very, very close together, and the tension is very, very low. And the harp is actually, it's almost universal in South American countries, actually. There's so many different countries, Colombia, Paraguay, Uruguay, they all have their different versions of harps. And the technique is more sort of, you almost play backwards to how I would play. And when you play, it has this it's almost a twangy sound, it's a very rhythmic sound. And I enjoy trying to get that kind of sound on one of these harps, which isn't necessarily designed for it. I'm playing this last because it really isn't designed for this kind of music, and it's quite wearing on the hands, but it's great fun. And I'm playing this piece actually because it's my dad's 70th birthday on, I think, Thursday, if I've got my dates correct. And unfortunately, I can't be home in Yorkshire to celebrate, as was the original plan. So if you're watching, Dad, this one is for you. thank you very much. Happy birthday, Dad, if you're watching. So, thank you for saying my English is perfect. It's absolutely not, but it is my native language, so it's probably better than any of the others I try and speak. If anyone has any questions, I'm just going to scroll through and see if there are any questions that I have missed in the feed. Questions about the harp, questions about music. I can't promise to have all the answers, but I can try. I saw one somewhere. The nail picks rather than the finger pad. Yeah, it seems that many stringed instruments use some kind of pick or nails. And I'm genuinely not quite sure why we use, I suppose, I think the nylon string guitar, I think that tends to use the finger pads, although I don't play the guitar, so I don't know. Someone please enlighten me. If anyone is a guitarist on the feed, please tell me. The koto does use a technique with pads. If you saw the technique I was doing here, often you will get a trill with the plastic nails, with the artificial nail now, with that very harsh sound, and the other hand will use the finger pads to play either a chord or some more sort of decorative thing. So they do actually mix the two, but for the most part it's played with just the three fingers and the three picks. How many years did it take you to play so well? Thank you for saying I play well. I feel like I'm still learning. I've been playing the harp since the age of 9, so quite a long time, although there were some big breaks in the middle, but yeah, pretty much the large proportion of my life. So, does anyone have any questions? I am not actually seeing too many questions. So we're almost at the end of, that's great, that means that I've told you all you need to know. I have explained translation and music. That's it, it's done, there are no more questions. I personally, I ended sort of writing this presentation, or rehearsing the pieces, I ended it honestly with possibly more questions than I began, which is always the case when you start to do a thing like this. You think, I'll explain this. Oh, but wait, what about that? And there's just a whole rabbit warren you can go down. I will put some links in the description afterwards to some of the places where I either got the information or just things that I think are really interesting. So once the video is over and it's edited, and I'll put that up. So that should be available in a couple of days if anybody does want to go back and just have a look at some of the things. So I'd just like to thank you all so much for joining me in my living room. I've kind of got used to talking into the camera. I didn't think at the beginning that I would, because it's a bit strange just talking into a rectangle. But really thank you all so much for tuning in from all over the world. Oh, is this questions? Oh, I'm sorry, we have a delay. How many hours a day do you play the harp? That depends if I'm rehearsing for a concert or not. For the next few days, probably none. I honestly don't know. I can play 3 to 4 hours a day if I want to, or if I'm studying, but you're not necessarily playing all that time. Sometimes you're working out fingering. Obviously, if you have a performance or way back when, an exam coming up, you play for a long time. But I personally can't play for 8 hours a day. I don't have that amount of concentration, and I really don't like coffee. So, but several hours certainly is perfectly, I would consider perfectly reasonable for me, but playing the harp is my job, and I enjoy it. So, could an old person learn to play the harp? Yes, absolutely. There is no age limit to playing the harp. My oldest pupil, one of my first pupils, actually bought herself a harp as a retirement present, I think when she was 60, and she began to play then. And she picked it up very, very quickly. It is just like everything, it's a magic P word, which is practice. And I much prefer the French word for practice, the répétition. It is just repeating, it is playing the same thing over and over and over again, which at first can seem very boring, but then you start to find the nuances of a piece. I must have played the Arran song literally hundreds of times in my life. And this week I thought I'd make a new arrangement of it because I wanted to explore different aspects of the rhythm and emphasize different parts of it. There is no age limit. If you are interested, I would just say go for it. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. With the violin, you never use fingernails when doing pits. That, again, is really interesting. I would love to have an actual back and forth with you about this. Maybe is that because the fingernails will get in the way when otherwise play? Or you do pits with the right hand? You'll have to explain that to me, or I'm going to look it up afterwards. Or you can explain in the comments. There is definitely a delay, yes. Do I have a Brazilian song in my repertoire? I don't think I do, to my knowledge, I'm afraid. Certainly not a harp solo. I have accompanied Brazilian music, or Brazilian influenced music, but I do have a friend who knows a lot about Brazilian music, so I will have to get some off her because it's you're right, it's a gap in my it is a gap in my repertoire. I mean, there's so many gaps. Choosing this I was trying to choose good examples of what I was wanting to talk about, but then you think, I don't have a piece from Russia. I know very little about Russian music. What are the classic Russian harmonies? Or you find yourself just going down these tracks and thinking there are not enough hours in the day and not enough brain space to devote yourself to becoming familiar with every single aspect of music. The best I can do is play it. I'll put on some folk music from, select a country and just listen to it and see if I can vaguely familiarise myself and pick out some interesting things. And sometimes you hear a melody and think, oh, that's just gorgeous. And you want to try and play it. Sometimes you think, that's just gorgeous. There's no way I can play that because it's too chromatic or it wouldn't work. Is the harp a good tango instrument? I like to think so. I have played tangos in the past, although I think they're not currently in my at fingertip repertoire. But I think that you can definitely have a good stab at a tango, and honestly, I think that would actually be really good. Harp and a violin is a very good combination as well. So even if you couldn't do the melody maybe all the time, you could do some kind of rhythm. I would love, again, to give that a go. I'm getting great ideas from this. I'm going to go away and write a whole new set list for the next time. Has anyone... good question. Has anyone attempted making a chromatic harp? Taras, are you still there? Taras is a harp maker in Australia who was watching. He might be asleep by now. It's 5 a.m. Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. Over the years, there have been many different ways of attacking the problem that the harp is not, strictly speaking, a chromatic instrument. We now use, I use levers to make it sort of semi-chromatic. The classical harp has pedals, which mean that you can change for example, all of your C's in one go, which makes it a lot quicker, and you can play more chromatically that way. Sorry, there was a noise upstairs, and I think it might have been the cat wanting to get out, but I'm not sure. I'm not hearing any crashes, something good. We've had cross-strum harps. We have the white notes of the piano one way and the black notes of the piano another way. There is the Welsh triple harp, which has the white notes down the outside and the black notes in a row up the middle vertically. I have tried to play one once. It was very much like I'd had too much to drink, but it is a beautiful instrument. So yes, there are lots of different ways people attack this problem. There is actually a harp maker in the north of France who makes a fully 12 notes to the scale, fully chromatic harp, which I've heard played, I've seen videos of it played, and it sounds wonderful, and you can get these wonderful harmonies, I'd love to have a go at playing it, but I'd also have to relearn all of my muscle memory because an octave would be a different place and my scales, everything would be different. But it's a very good solution. So yes, that is one solution that people have come up with. Oh, I'm sorry, there's not enough characters. Maybe if you send me an email, or I can look it up, because I'm very intrigued as to how that works. I've never seen it done up close. There's not quite enough time to go into what kind of harp I'd recommend for a beginner, because we are just about out of time. We just have a couple of minutes left. You'd be very welcome to send me an email, but very briefly speaking, I would recommend finding a reputable harp maker and buying a harp with certainly no fewer than 34 strings if it's at all possible. There are little harps, and there's nothing wrong with little harps. I have one myself just out of shot, and they're very portable, but if you want to play more repertoire, you will find that a smaller harp quickly you'll want more strings. Maybe that's just a personal thing, but the vast majority of people find that 34 strings is good. 36 strings is a bonus. 38 means you just get a bigger instrument. I've never owned a 38 string harp, and I like my 36 strings just because it means the whole instrument's a bit bigger and I get more oomph. But otherwise I'd say 34. I hope that's helpful in a very, very quick fashion. Thank you. Folk pieces often have left-hand pizzicato. Fingernails get in the way. Fascinating. So you see, I also have learnt something there. Well, I think that probably just about brings us to the end of my debut live stream, and I've not heard any technical complaints, nor I heard any crashes from upstairs with the cat misbehaving, so hopefully he was still asleep where I left him earlier. He might have come and said hello, but he also has a tendency to eat my fingers when I'm trying to play, so it's a little distracting. So again, I just very, very much like to thank everyone involved for all their hard work in arranging this, in organising this, in changing the programme and changing the organisation very rapidly from a pre-coronavirus situation to a mid/post-coronavirus situation. I'm really impressed with the communication and the help that I have had from all of you, especially Elizabeth has been very, very communicative, helping me test everything many, many times to get the technology sorted out, doing sound tests. And also the Institute of Modern Language Research, again, thank you very, very much for asking me to come and give this spectonférence, as my French friend put it, and that's now my new favourite word. It is spectacle conférence, because conférence is presentation or lecture in French, spectonférence. The School of Advanced Studies at the University of London, it's all part of their thing, and also the Open World Research Initiative for putting on this whole programme and the different strands. Thoroughly recommend you have a look at the website, see what else is going on. Probably most of it will now be online, therefore more accessible to everyone around the world. So a huge, huge thank you to you all for joining me, and I wish you all a very good evening, good afternoon, or even good morning for those brave souls on the other side of the world, quite literally. Thank you very, very much, and goodbye for now.